Everyone remembers that interview as a fearless duchess opening up to a trusted friend, a genuinely vulnerable conversation between two women who happen to know each other well. Look a little closer, though, and a considerably different story starts to emerge from underneath that surface reading.
First, she reveals the interview. She hit back at suggestions that the couple didn't know what they were going to be asked. She then admitted that she had told Prince Harry and Meghan that this was all about a win-win. This is going to be good for you guys, and it's going to be good for me. So they sat down to film for the 3.5 hours, and Oprah thought that her career legacy was set. Instead, as we'll soon see, she's now desperately trying to explain why she encouraged Meghan Markle's lies rather than challenged.
Two of the most media-savvy women working in entertainment at the time, sitting together in a rented California garden, each walking away from that afternoon with exactly what they'd come there hoping to get. 5 years on from that original broadcast, the polished, carefully constructed image around that interview is genuinely starting to show real cracks in public. And I think the most interesting part of this entire story isn't actually the original interview content itself anymore. It's watching how both women currently handle questions about it years later, with the benefit of considerable hindsight and facing a noticeably more skeptical audience than the one that first watched it live. Let's actually build out the fuller picture, because I think there's a version of this story that rarely gets told properly. Meghan, at the time, was looking to rebuild a public image that had taken a real battering, and there's genuinely no bigger name in American media when it comes to shaping how the public feels about someone than Oprah Winfrey. What tends to get left out of the retelling is that Oprah had reportedly been chasing a major royal interview for years. This wasn't a spontaneous act of friendship that happened to also make great television. According to critics who've revisited the timeline, Meghan was simply the royal figure who eventually said yes to a conversation Oprah had wanted to have for a very long time with someone, anyone, connected to that family. Here's the detail that a lot of people find genuinely revealing once they learn it.
They didn't know, obviously, anything that I was going to ask them, but I had said to them ahead of time, I'm going to try to cover everything. This interview took 3.5 hours. And as is always the case for me, I was just trying to carefully go through everything that had come up in the past.
No, you weren't. You were just admitting that you wanted it to be a win. You weren't talking about it being a win for the truth or a win for journalism or a win for the British royal family. You were talking about it being a win for Harry and Meghan and for you.
Long before Meghan entered the picture at all, Oprah reportedly pursued an interview with Princess Diana, arguably the single biggest royal interview imaginable at the time. According to long-standing reports, that pursuit went nowhere. Diana is widely described as having declined graciously, reportedly with a polite note, choosing instead to keep her private reflections away from that particular spotlight, in keeping with the approach she'd settled on for herself. Reports over the years have also suggested Oprah hoped to land an interview with William and Catherine at some point. That conversation, by most accounts, never materialized either, described as a respectful but firm decline, with the couple choosing to maintain distance from that specific kind of television event. A lot of critics read real significance into that pattern. Senior working royals, across multiple generations, apparently saw limited upside in sitting for that kind of deeply personal, globally broadcast conversation, and consistently chose institutional tradition and privacy over the platform Oprah was offering, which raises the obvious question critics keep returning to. What specific combination of circumstances finally produced a yes? Their answer tends to be fairly consistent. It took someone facing genuinely intense public pressure, who simultaneously recognized a rare opportunity to tell their own version of events on one of the largest stages in the world.
Crash Panda asking, why do you think she's bringing this all up now? Stephanie Sidley replies, because Harry and Meghan are backpedaling on the racism claims. But the royal grift ain't happy. Maybe I should post the full unedited interview on X, so we don't have a rewriting of history. Fuck you, Oprah. You knew what you were doing.
Meghan, in that reading, wasn't Oprah's close personal friend in the way a lot of viewers assumed watching the broadcast. She was the royal-adjacent figure who was finally willing to say yes after years of other doors staying closed. Stay with me, because I think the analysis of Oprah's interviewing style specifically deserves its own real attention here, separate from just the Meghan-specific story we've been building. A lot of critics have spent years picking apart the idea that Oprah's on-camera warmth was ever purely, simply genuine, without any additional strategic function layered underneath it. The calm voice, The thoughtful pauses, the now famous question, "And how did that make you feel?" weren't just gestures of compassion in this reading. They were also, quite deliberately, interview techniques designed specifically to draw out emotional, headline-generating moments that would stay with an audience long after the broadcast ended. Other observers push back on that framing entirely, arguing those same techniques are simply what made her genuinely effective at getting people to open up in ways other interviewers rarely managed. Here's a structural point critics raise that I think deserves real weight regardless of where you land on the warmth question. As both host and executive producer, Oprah had substantial control over how that entire interview was ultimately presented. The questions asked, and critically, what actually made the final edit.
This is in regards to, and you know it's what went viral, you know it's what went around the world. Were you silence or silenced? And Oprah is now trying to make this extraordinary argument. And I mean, I say extraordinary in the sense that it's totally not believable, that this action was designed to push Meghan Markle into whether she was actually telling the truth. You've done this job for a very long time. You don't do that. What you say is you say, "Oh, wow, Meghan, who told you couldn't speak? We need the names. We've got to call these people out. When did they say that? Who are you referring to? Are you sure?" You know, the courtiers say they offered to help you and give you whatever you needed. But she didn't do that, did she?
When one party controls both sides of that equation, they inevitably have outsized influence over how a conversation gets remembered by history. Which means the guest, in this specific case Meghan, likely had considerably less control over the finished product than most viewers probably assumed while watching it unfold. If this breakdown is giving you more than the usual surface-level retelling, the like button genuinely helps this channel keep doing exactly this kind of deeper dig into stories most coverage treats as already fully settled. There's a specific criticism that's followed Oprah for years in entertainment circles, even if it doesn't always get discussed openly. Critics have pointed to a recurring pattern, helping launch high-profile personalities, benefiting from their rise, and then creating clear distance once those same figures become genuinely mired in controversy.
She made one movement, finger to her mouth, and she now claims that that gives her some type of journalistic integrity. I don't think so,
Names that come up repeatedly in this specific criticism include Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, and the Brazilian spiritual figure known as John of God, who was later convicted of serious crimes after years of public endorsement from Oprah's platform. According to critics, once those controversies hit their peak, Oprah reliably moved to separate herself and continue forward relatively unscathed. Whether or not you find that pattern damning, it's a criticism that's proven remarkably durable across multiple, entirely separate controversies spanning years. Another criticism aimed at her public image involves the Maui wildfire fundraising effort specifically. Critics have argued that rather than fully addressing the substance of public concerns about how that effort was handled, Oprah's response leaned more heavily on describing the personal toll the criticism itself had taken on her. Whether that's a fair characterization is genuinely debatable, but critics point to it as one more example of a pattern they believe they've tracked for years. That when controversy builds, the conversation has a tendency to shift back toward her own experience of the situation. Related to all of this,
Were you silent or were you silenced?
The latter.
Okay.
She's
Very
embarrassed.
nice. I don't think I've done it since. I don't know where the hell that came from. Whoop. Okay. I wanted to be clear. Was she silenced? Were people telling her not to talk? That's why I said that. I said it for clarification because I didn't want later to hear, well, no, it wasn't that. It really was that I was silenced. They wouldn't let me talk. So it was all for clarification.
Bullshit, Oprah. You've literally just said what you should have asked. Were people telling her not to talk? You didn't ask that. You played into a lie. And as a result, your legacy is now trashed.
critics note that Oprah has rarely suffered lasting reputational damage connected to people or products she's publicly championed, even when those same people or products later became genuinely scandal-ridden. Some connect this directly to her level of production control, not just interviewing but shaping questions, editing, and final broadcast decisions across her entire body of work, which critics argue provides real protective insulation whenever difficult situations eventually surface. Even the famously beloved "you get a car" giveaway moment gets revisited through this lens. Genuinely iconic television, but with recipients later discussing significant tax obligations that came attached to accepting those vehicles, a detail that wasn't nearly as visible in the moment as the celebration itself. So, when Oprah appears visibly more guarded discussing the Meghan interview today, and by multiple accounts, including a notable Vanity Fair conversation where she reportedly looked uncomfortable and moved the topic along quickly, critics don't read that as coincidental. They read it as entirely consistent with a pattern they believe spans her entire career, creating distance from complicated moments precisely as public sentiment starts shifting underneath them.
They play her this old clip from 2021 where basically during the pandemic, when people are locked in their homes, they're struggling to pay their bills, their businesses have been shut down, Oprah, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry sat around in a massive mansion, I believe owned by Rob Lowe, and complained about how hard their lives were. Now, this is when Meghan Markle stopped being relatable to anybody. People are locked in their homes. People are dying. Their family members are on life support, right, on incubators. And she's sitting there complaining how hard it was for her to live in a palace and be in the royal family eating crumpets and scones.
It's also worth naming plainly that the pattern critics describe around Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, and John of God specifically involves 3 genuinely different situations with different levels of Oprah's actual involvement and endorsement at the time. Lumping them together as a single unified pattern risks flattening real distinctions between them. Some involved considerably more direct, sustained promotion than others. That said, the broader observation that public figures who launch careers under someone's platform occasionally see that same platform distance itself once trouble arrives isn't necessarily a uniquely damning critique specific to Oprah alone, though critics argue the pattern is notable regardless. It's arguably just how influence and reputational risk management tend to work at that level of visibility, for almost anyone occupying a similar position of media power. Now let's turn to Meghan specifically, because critics make a related but genuinely distinct argument about her, namely that she hasn't managed long-term public perception with quite the same apparent skill or consistency. One recurring online criticism centers on the claim that her public persona seems to shift depending on circumstances, different facets becoming more prominent at different points, often tracking closely with whoever she happened to be involved with at the time.
Oprah realized after that interview, in my opinion, because of all the reporting and all the lies that were debunked, Oprah realized she was used. Meghan Markle is a con artist, and she used Oprah Winfrey to launder her image.
Critics point to periods emphasizing food and cooking during an earlier relationship with a chef, later shifts in fashion and public presentation once her relationship with Harry became public. Some commentators have drawn comparisons to Princess Diana specifically, worth stressing clearly that this remains opinion rather than anything close to established fact, but it's a comparison that surfaces regularly in this specific line of criticism. Some online commentary goes further still, with people saying they genuinely struggle to identify one consistent, through-line persona across the different chapters of her public life. Whether that's a fair read is obviously debated, but it's a criticism that keeps resurfacing regardless. It's genuinely worth pausing to note that adapting your public presentation across different relationships and life stages isn't automatically evidence of inauthenticity on its own. Most people, famous or otherwise, present somewhat differently depending on context and circumstance, and treating that as inherently suspicious risks holding public figures to an unrealistic standard of static, unchanging identity that very few actual humans genuinely maintain across a decade of major life transitions and shifting personal circumstances.
She was gunning for this interview. She started poaching Harry and Meghan about a sit-down 6 months before they were wed. She was desperate to sit down with Princess Diana, kissing her butt, sitting across from her at Kensington Palace, trying to get Diana to give her an exclusive. Diana lovingly wrote her a note that was like, no way.
The deeper issue, according to these same critics, isn't really about shifting style or shifting interests considered purely on their own terms. It's about a broader narrative pattern they believe keeps recurring, one where Meghan tends to be positioned as the person who's been treated unfairly, while blame lands elsewhere. Supporters push back firmly on that framing, arguing she's simply sharing her own genuine experiences. Critics point specifically to the palace staff disputes and the well-documented disagreement with Catherine as examples, noting that public reporting around that specific incident has shifted meaningfully over time as additional accounts surfaced, prompting a lot of people to reconsider the story from angles that weren't initially prominent. There's also a recurring claim that Meghan has built relationships strategically around whatever stage of her career she happened to be navigating at the time, with those connections evolving as her circumstances changed. Supporters strongly reject that characterization as reductive and unfair.
Wanted to sit down with the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Catherine, and they said, absolutely no way, that's beneath us. She got Fergie, which is convenient because I think Harry and Meghan are on the Fergie level. But this was a huge win for Oprah Winfrey, who'd been chasing legitimate members of the British royal family for an interview for a decade.
But it's a claim that surfaces consistently enough in public commentary that it's worth naming directly rather than pretending it doesn't exist. Her recent MasterChef Australia appearance gets cited frequently as a fresh example worth examining. She traveled internationally for the appearance, spoke warmly about food as her love language, framing cooking as a way of connecting with family and close friends. Critics question whether that specific framing reflects a genuinely long-standing part of her identity or represents simply the latest chapter in an evolving public presentation. Supporters see it as an authentic reflection of real personal interest, full stop. The online reaction was immediate and fairly pointed. A lot of critics specifically challenged her comments about closeness with family, pointing directly to well-documented tension involving her father, ongoing legal disputes connected to her half-sister, and years of accumulated headlines around those specific family dynamics.
She knows what the repercussions were. Ultimately, Prince Philip dies weeks later, and we understand that he was devastated over this interview in hospital while it aired. And at the time, I remember some of the headlines that people from the Sussex camp were saying that because he was in hospital, they shouldn't have to hold this interview, that didn't affect them. The poor man dies weeks later. It devastated Queen Elizabeth too. It made the last few years of her life very difficult to navigate. On top of the Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor saga, she had Harry and Meghan accusing her family of racism and bullying and not taking their mental health serious.
Supporters counter that family relationships are genuinely complicated and shouldn't be judged purely through selective media coverage, which is a fair point on its own, even if it doesn't fully resolve the underlying tension critics are pointing at. Social media also had its fun with the cooking segment specifically. One widely shared joke suggested that if a child came downstairs and found an elaborate rainbow fruit platter waiting for them, they'd immediately assume something had gone seriously wrong at home. Exaggerated, obviously, but the kind of joke that spreads precisely because it's tapping into something a lot of people were already feeling about the segment's tone. Critics have also drawn a direct line between that warm, home-centered image and previously reported allegations from her time as a working royal. Specifically, reports describing workplace bullying claims and formal complaints from staff members who reportedly felt genuinely distressed. Meghan has denied those allegations directly, and her representatives have disputed the claims entirely.
This interview was historic. It changed the course of royal history. It changed the course of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's lives. And those of us who knew at the time, like you did, that what Oprah Winfrey was actually allowing was lies to be broadcast around the world in an attempt to bring down the British royal family. At the time, we called her out. But she was surrounded, Tash, by so much noise and so much wokery and so many people patting her on the back and saying, oh, well done, you've just changed the royal family forever.
Critics argue the gap between the camera-facing persona and those reported workplace accounts is exactly why this particular debate keeps resurfacing rather than fading. Supporters maintain the criticism has been unfair or significantly overstated relative to what actually happened. Then there's the product-level scrutiny. The Australian honey, resurfaced beekeeping photos, the edible flower sprinkles connected to her as ever brand. Social media users have picked apart nearly every product and promotional beat in real time, with some reviewers reporting genuine packaging or quality issues, others sharing considerably more positive experiences. Standard territory for any high-profile product launch, honestly, with opinions sharply split depending on who's reviewing. There's also a contradiction critics point to directly. Earlier in the year, reports suggested her team had specifically objected to certain royal terminology being used in a legal setting. Just months later, MasterChef Australia promoted a challenge built explicitly around a dish fit for a duchess. Critics argue that contrast raises real questions about consistent branding. Supporters counter that legal proceedings and entertainment marketing operate under entirely different rules and shouldn't be judged by the same standard. Either way, it became its own separate talking point. Here's what a lot of critics find genuinely revealing about Oprah's current reluctance to revisit the interview specifically. They don't see it as an isolated instance at all. They frame it as part of a broader pattern involving multiple high-profile figures who've reportedly created increasing distance from Meghan over recent years. Royal biographer Angela Levin has publicly argued for some time that Meghan and Oprah are no longer the close allies a lot of people assumed at the time. Levin has also referenced a reportedly negative public reception at an event in Montecito, though accounts of exactly what happened there vary and remain genuinely disputed. Separate reports have suggested some prominent Montecito residents now prefer keeping their distance, though those specific claims lean heavily on anonymous sourcing and commentary rather than anything formally confirmed. Critics also point to the broader commercial picture. Media projects that haven't generated the anticipated level of excitement, with online discussion often centering more on viewership numbers and rankings than on the actual content itself. Supporters argue selective statistics rarely tell the complete story, and that success across streaming platforms can be measured through multiple different metrics beyond raw viewership. Even so, the mixed reception has given critics plenty of ongoing material. Then came the Emmy nomination, which sparked its own separate wave of debate. Critics questioned the recognition itself, with commentators including Megyn Kelly publicly voicing skepticism about what the nomination actually said about the broader process. Supporters countered that nominations move through established industry voting procedures that exist independently of any individual's personal opinion of the nominee. Online speculation about how major entertainment awards actually get decided spread from there, much of it unproven but still becoming part of the wider conversation regardless. Harry's own situation added considerably to the broader picture during this same period. His legal battle against the Daily Mail's publisher ended with the majority of his claims dismissed, a significant setback in a case that had drawn enormous public attention throughout. Supporters maintain his broader concerns about press conduct remain valid regardless of the specific outcome. After the ruling, Harry publicly criticized the result in strong language, which drew its own separate criticism, including from a former UK Justice Secretary who reportedly described his comments as over-the-top and unacceptable. Reports have also suggested that when financial questions arose separately, at least one former associate made clear they weren't prepared to offer continued support, a detail that spread quickly through coverage. Critics point to reports of shifting business relationships, movement in public approval ratings, and circulating petitions as broader evidence of changing public sentiment. Supporters dispute how much weight any of those specific data points actually deserve, arguing they don't capture the full picture. Which brings us back, finally, to the interview that started all of this. Critics argue it was never simply journalism, and never simply two close friends having a private conversation that happened to be filmed. It was, in their reading, a moment where both parties gained something genuinely valuable. Meghan received a massive global platform to share her account, while Oprah secured one of the defining interviews of her entire career after years of reported effort trying to land exactly that kind of royal conversation. The partnership, critics argue, worked cleanly while it worked, right up until public opinion started genuinely shifting underneath it, at which point it became considerably more complicated for both parties to navigate. It's worth noting, for full context, that Diana's earlier decision to decline a similar opportunity is often cited by commentators as protecting both her privacy and her long-term legacy. A contrast a lot of critics draw directly against everything that followed in 2021 and after. They also point to Queen Elizabeth's decades-long approach of rarely responding publicly to controversy at all, simply continuing with duty regardless of surrounding headlines, as a genuinely stark contrast to the run of interviews, documentaries, and public projects that came in the years following the Oprah conversation. Looking back now, critics find it genuinely notable how little enthusiasm either woman shows for revisiting that interview publicly today. To them, that reluctance is one of the clearest available signals of just how dramatically the surrounding conversation has shifted since 2021. Whether you personally accept every piece of that critical reading or reject most of it outright as reading far too much into ordinary human behavior, one thing genuinely remains hard to seriously dispute. This specific interview is still being actively and passionately debated, years after it originally aired, with genuinely no clear public consensus anywhere in sight. Some genuinely believe Meghan came out ahead overall in that original exchange. Others argue just as firmly that Oprah did. Plenty of other people genuinely think both women walked away exactly as they'd intended right at the time. right before the entire broader story eventually took a turn that neither of them likely fully anticipated at that specific moment in the garden. What do you genuinely think? Who actually came out ahead in that original arrangement once you strip away the sentiment, and does knowing everything we now know about the years since actually change how you personally view that interview looking back at it today? I'd genuinely love to hear your honest take on this, whichever direction you land, so drop it in the comments below and let's actually get a real conversation going about it. And if you genuinely enjoyed this kind of deeper, more balanced breakdown rather than just another rehashed headline, hit subscribe on Palace Insider so you don't miss what we cover next week, and leave a like on your way out if you'd like to see more content exactly like this. It genuinely helps this channel keep growing and reaching more people who want the fuller picture. I genuinely and quite sincerely look forward to seeing you in the next one.